So, good morning, everyone, colleagues, speakers, and more generally the audience joining us online today from many countries around the world, I understand. My name is Patrick Moulette. I'm the head of the OECD Anti-Corruption Division. And I also need to thank the speakers. I think we have an impressive caliber and quality for the speakers today. So I have another more logistical announcement to make at this stage. The event will take place with two languages, English and Russian. So for interpretation in Russian, you should use the globe button, which you can see somewhere at the bottom of the screen, I guess. So choose the globe button and choose French language, which is very strange, but of course it will not be French. You will have the right interpretation, because again, the two languages are English and Russian. So in this way, everyone could take part in the discussion. And also, I am told that you can use the chat function, ask questions, make comments whenever you want. So now, with these logistical notes, we can start officially. This is the third year that the Business Integrity Group of the OECD Anti-Corruption Network for Eastern Europe and Central Asia is holding a regional business integrity event. I think it's fair to say that the Business Integrity Group has become a successful platform for exchange of experiences and mutual learning for the public, for the private sector practitioners from the ASEAN countries engaged or interested in business integrity. Last year, in May 2021, the network presented the preliminary findings of the second study on business integrity. So today, what are the objectives of the meeting? In fact, the main objective is to discuss the policy recommendations, or rather the updated policy recommendations, and analyze the progress and remaining challenges identified by the study. To this end, there will be 3 thematic sessions, which are linked to a specific policy or analytical document. And the sessions will focus on showcasing good practices implemented by governments, businesses, and development partners in ASEAN countries and beyond. Of course, each session will include discussion, proper space for discussion, and questions and answers from the audience. So we hope, the colleagues of the Secretariat, we hope that we'll have a very interactive dialogue today. More precisely now about the sessions. The first session, during the first session, the Working Group on Bribery Chair, Mr. Drago Kos, will present the role of the 2021 anti-bribery recommendation of the OECD, the role of the recommendation in assisting government and businesses in promoting ethics, compliance, and integrity. The second session will launch the 2022 edition of the study on business integrity trends in ASEAN countries. Here, the OECD will present updated policy recommendations and key areas where improvement and cooperation are needed to foster business integrity climate in the region. The third session will provide an insight into the issue of integrity of small and medium enterprises, a very important topic. For this session, our partners from the Center for International and Private Enterprise will present their recent study, which is entitled Doing Business with Integrity Stories from Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises. And finally, at the end, the ASEAN Secretariat and our EBRD partners will provide an update about the next steps that will be implemented in the ASEAN business integrity group, framework, including the second phase of the capacity building project, which is supported by the EBRD, and including the use of business integrity performance indicators in the Istanbul monitoring program of the ACN. As you can see, so the plan today is quite ambitious. We have a lot of discussion, several sessions. So I will not speak any longer now, will not take much of your time, and I would like to give the floor right now to Mr. Nicolas Pinault, who is the Deputy Director in the OECD Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs, who is supervising the anti-corruption work of the OECD. So I'll give the floor to Nicolas for opening, welcoming remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick, and good morning to colleagues, and welcome to this roundtable where we are indeed launching the 2022 OECD study on business integrity in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. So no need to say that this roundtable comes at a critical juncture of the pandemic. Now the disruption caused by the war against Ukraine, which have sent shockwaves through the global economy, and with especially Eastern Europe and Central Asia hard hit. So those countries, they are facing security concerns, increasing prices, disrupted supply chains, and other economic and social challenges. But also this context creates new opportunities for integrity violations and corruption. So really both governments and companies must prioritize integrity like probably never before. So policymakers and businesses all over the world and also in these regions, they're looking for ways, or they should be looking for ways to respond effectively. And we at the OECD, we are working hard to help governments uphold and promote sustainable governance, business integrity, transparency, and anti-corruption. And let me highlight in particular three dimensions when it comes to this OECD support. First, as I'm sure you know very well, the OECD is a standard setter in the business integrity and anti-corruption field. And in today's roundtable, we will highlight the latest updates to our standards in the field of foreign bribery, including and starting with the 2021 OECD anti-bribery recommendation. Secondly, the OECD is also using its convening power to engineer policy dialogue. And over the past 2 decades, the Anti-Corruption Network for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, ACN, has helped connect the business community with governments in the regions to raise awareness and understanding of business integrity and anti-corruption strategies. Since last year, the OECD Anti-Corruption Division is organizing business integrity roundtables. This provides a forum for public and private sector practitioners to exchange good practice on integrity and anti-corruption compliance. And this year, the roundtable will focus on how to promote business integrity, what incentives can government use, and how to assess compliance programs. But the OECD and the ACN in that particular context also provides governments, businesses, and key partners with expertise and tailor-made training to fight corruption and bribery and create a level playing field for enterprises of all sides. And this assistance remains crucial, especially now in the current circumstances when the political and economic stability of the region is at stake. So the study we are launching today is the second edition and was produced as part of the EU for Integrity project with funding from the European Union. So we are really grateful to the EU for yet another productive collaboration. Back in 2016, when ACN produced its first study, there was still a limited understanding of the role of government agencies and the private sector in promoting business integrity. In a way, the 2016 study set the baseline for measuring progress. And today, the 2022 edition shows that ASEAN countries are increasingly aware of the good practices and standards in the business integrity area, and there is growing interest and readiness to implement key measures across the region. For instance, the results of the survey show that companies acknowledge the improvements in the overall business integrity climate in their countries over the last 5 years. We have also seen the increasing inclusion of high-level corruption in anti-corruption strategies and improvements in legislation on whistleblower protection and corporate liability. However, the most serious problems highlighted in the first study 5 years ago are yet to be effectively addressed, like the lack of appropriate corruption risk assessment, little attention devoted by governments to private sector corruption, restricted access to the beneficial ownership data, and others. The study also shows that in 60% of cases, government agencies or units responsible for business integrity are not established. And in 20% of the cases, those agencies are not fully functional. So this is only a small improvement from the 2016 survey. So going forward, businesses will have to prioritize business integrity as part of their long-term development strategy and invest in compliance programs. On their part, governments will have also to develop stronger safeguards against high-level corruption and state capture by the private sector. So let me conclude by saying that more than ever, and despite the geopolitical headwinds, there is a need for global cooperation and coordinated actions to support business integrity. We need to prioritize joined-up efforts to tackle corruption at every level and improve awareness of the need for integrity and anti-corruption mechanisms in the smallest and largest enterprises. And to achieve this, we will all need to be innovative and creative, using digital technologies to counter corruption and instill more transparency, being also more imaginative on institutional formula, as illustrated by the establishment of the Business Ombudsman Council in Ukraine, and in the end, to move from commitments to real results. So let me assure you of the OECD's commitments to working closely with the government and non-government stakeholders in ASEAN countries to help them enhance business integrity and ultimately lift living standards for everyone. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I wish you productive discussions this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolas, for giving us the general geopolitical outlook and also the insights into this new study for the ASEAN region, which I think will put us all in a good mindset for the discussion. And now we can move to the first panel of this meeting. I would immediately invite Mr. Drago Kos, the chairman of the Working Group on Bribery, to present, because we know that he is, we all are, but he is a very particularly busy man, so he'll have to leave us earlier. So without undue introductions, Drago, I would like to ask you to talk to us about the 2021 recommendations. Patrick already mentioned them. These are the new standards. A lot of this 2021 recommendations are actually tools to promote business integrity. So please give us a broad view of what these new standards are.
Thank you, Olga, and dear ladies and gentlemen, friends, I'm really very happy to be here today with you, especially because I see so many familiar and friendly faces around the table, well, around the virtual table. So as you know, the OECD Convention Against Bribery of Foreign Public Officials in International Business Transactions was adopted in 1997. It entered into force in 1999, and it was, let's say, we can say upgraded in 2009 with recommendation for further improving the fight against foreign bribery. Since that was so many years ago, the working group decided to enhance the text, the existing text of the recommendation, and to deal with some new areas which emerged since 2009. And we developed a new text, which was adopted in November last year, and it is known under as 2021 recommendation for further combating foreign bribery. As at the outset, I have to say that there are many important issues in the new recommendation, but what is particularly important for all the businesses is the fact that the new recommendation is recognizing the fact that business sector is not the enemy of the governments in fighting corruption. So the companies are not the bad guys, but business sector is a partner of companies or governments in fighting corruption. This is something which you will see interwoven in all provisions of the recommendation. We in any area where that was possible, we have tried to show that companies should be considered as the partners of the government, not the ones who are committing criminal offenses of corruption or any other type. So for the first time, we introduced something which is called positive incentives for compliance and good corporate behavior. Under the text of the recommendation, you will see 4 conditions which have to be considered and which are the most important for any company when it comes to fighting foreign bribery. When it happens, all companies have to disclose the fact voluntarily. They have to cooperate with law enforcement agencies. They have to accept the responsibility, and they have to engage in remediation measures. And those 4 elements are important for companies, let's say, when their compliance systems are being assessed, when it comes to the question of the sanctions, when it comes to the issue of which procedures will be used against the company, but also when it comes to the issue how to motivate companies to develop effective compliance systems. So until this recommendation, the only benefits the companies could get were related to the proceedings against the companies in case something went wrong. And of course, companies are saying, well, why would we do it? Because if our compliance systems are good, then no bribery will occur. So we accepted that argument. We introduced those incentives for compliance, which now appear even before any proceedings against the company will start. We have the form, let's say, if companies develop effective compliance systems, they can get public advantages granted, such as, let's say, export credits, procurement contracts, and so on. But it's also taken into context in the enforcement as it was before. We are also saying that the mere existence of a compliance program does not fully exonerate a company from liability. So you see, we are trying to balance. We're offering companies the incentives to do it. If they don't do it, and if something goes wrong, we carefully assess the quality of their compliance systems. We are also putting a lot of emphasis on the awareness raising in the private sector, including SMEs. Let's say yesterday we just had a meeting with the anti-corruption working group of the G20, and one of the topics was how to help SMEs, because SMEs build, let's say, the large majority of the companies around the world, to develop or to enhance their business integrity. So we are asking countries to engage in the raising awareness of the private sector, including in target profession and sector specific initiatives, which would give, let's say, the SMEs much more role and importance. What is also new in the recommendation is that we are entering for the first time so-called the demand side of foreign bribery. So what we are asking governments to train their officials working abroad. We are asking governments to raise the awareness of companies performing abroad. But we are also asking governments to engage in collective actions with other countries and companies when negotiating and discussing things with the host country, where, let's say, companies are being exposed to extortions of bribes and similar things. So we are introducing the term of collective action. You will find it 3 or 4 times in the recommendation, which means that the public sector and the private sector have to engage together collectively in the fight against bribery, or if you wish, in enhancing the integrity. The next measure, which is also new, is the, let's say, the introduction of so-called non-trial resolutions. Those are tools which have different names in different jurisdictions. Some call them plea bargaining, some call them negotiated settlements, DPAs, MPAs, and so on. Basically, it is NTRs are nothing but out of the trial solutions of cases where companies have engaged in foreign bribery cases. We set the basic framework. We put a lot of emphasis on the publicity and transparency of those NTRs because we would like to see, we would like to let's say, to influence the public, especially the civil society, that they will see that the justice can also be done through the use of the NTRs. Of course, NTRs are particularly important for the companies because they don't have to engage in sometimes very lengthy court proceedings. They can present their cases to the prosecution services or to judiciary, and they can reach the agreement at the end. Of course, this will only happen if they will fulfill, let's say, the first basic elements which I mentioned at the beginning, and if they will be seen that they're really engaging in enhancing their business integrity. There's another part which is also important, also for the private sector, the part on protection of whistleblowers. Now, following the EU Directive of Protection of Whistleblowers, which is not understandably limited to the use of EU funds, we have introduced provisions on whistleblower protection in the public, but also in the private sector. And you will see plenty of guidelines there, how whistleblowers should be enabled to report and how they should be protected. And we really hope that this will be enough for the start to enable much better engagement of whistleblowers also in the private sector. And as I said already, we discussed the demand side of the bribery too. There are two annexes added to the recommendation. Annex 1, which is basically interpretive provisions of the provisions of the convention, but Annex 2 on good practice guidance on internal controls, ethics, and compliance. And if you want to see what do you have to do to have effective compliance system in place, you can take a look in the sections 12, 14, and 15, which will give you a very good idea what, according to the OECD standards, is considered to be an effective compliance system. Of course, and I'm ending with that, you might say, well, this recommendation is in place only for the members of the working group on bribery. Yes, of course, but we really hope that all countries of the ASEAN will follow those standards too, as a guide, especially hoping that many of countries, members of the ASEAN, will once join the working group on bribery. So those are not only standards for the WGB, those are planned to be the standards which will be applicable in many other countries of the world too, and of course in the companies of those countries too. It will be, I know it won't be too easy to implement the recommendation, especially not in a very short period of time, but we do understand this will be a lengthy process. And it goes without saying that the working group on bribery is more than willing to assist you in doing that, either directly or through the ASEAN. And I'm really looking forward to see the improvements in this sector too. And ending, I really have to apologize because I have to run to another meeting, so I will not be able to stay with you. But you will have members of let's say, more than qualified secretariat with you, and they'll be able to answer any possible questions which you might have in relation to the 2021 recommendation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Drago, for giving us this big menu of actions that governments can do. And it's very good that we actually do have, I'm looking at the screen, and we do have quite a good number of representatives from governments from the ASEAN countries and also from business associations. So we have a good forum to discuss how we can actually start implementing these 2021 recommendations in the region. And to start this discussion, I have two excellent panelists here with us today. I will introduce both of you and then we'll jump into the questions. So for this session, I would like to invite Gemma Yolfi, the Head of Compliance, Corporate Governance and Collective Action of the Basel Institute on Governance. Hello, Gemma.
Hi.
And we have Lana Sinichkina, partner attorney at law of Arzinger from Ukraine. Lana is also the member of the executive committee of the Ukrainian Network for Integrity and Compliance, the collective action that we have in Ukraine. So to start, I would like to ask a more general question to Gemma. We do see that the standards are being developed and more specific tools are already established in those standards that call on the governments to promote business integrity. It does give us a rather high bar globally and also for our region. And we know what we want to achieve. However, of course, in practical terms, it's not that easy to implement this recommendation, and especially in countries where governments are not necessarily sending the right signals, and sometimes they are a part of the problem rather than solution. So in this complex context, how do you think the business can contribute to the implementation of these recommendations? What can companies do?
Thank you. That's a great question, of course, and a big one. Maybe what I'm going to do is, if I may, focus really on one element, which is the collective action part, because it was mentioned very clearly by Drago, which was very helpful, to say that the private sector is not the enemy of government. So,
I'm very sorry, I request to everybody to mute yourselves. You can ask questions in chat. Back to Gemma.
Thanks. Sorry. So, as I was saying, Drago helpfully said that the private sector is not the enemy of government. And because it is a challenge, as you say, to implement this recommendation, and particularly Annex 2 for many companies, because it is a comprehensive overview of what's required for an integrity and anti-corruption compliance program. Perhaps one of the best ways to do this is to recognize that helping each other, supporting each other, in other words, acting together in collective action to develop a preventive approach to the corruption risks is going to be a constructive way to getting started in implementing this recommendation. So we heard that it's mentioned 3 times, collective action, and I think it's worth probably just spending a moment to remind ourselves what that looks like. And as Drago said, awareness raising is a very important part of the recommendation, and it's directed not only at the public sector, but also at the private sector. And countries are also encouraged to develop profession and sector-specific initiatives, to use the wording of the recommendation, including through collective action and partnerships between the private and public sector in awareness-raising activities. Now, this is a fairly low-hanging fruit in practice. It's not particularly expensive, it's not particularly complicated, but it means actually taking a step towards each other and recognizing that holding joint events, joint conferences, surveys, discussion forums, whatever it might be, to start asking each other questions about how do we see the topic of corruption within our country, within our business operations, and what could that strategy look like to address some of those risks. So that's one element of the collective action part in the recommendation. And then member countries are also encouraged to, and then there's a quite meaty section in the recommendation that says that countries should consider fostering, facilitating, engaging, or participating in anti-bribery collective action initiatives with private and public sector representatives, as well as civil society organizations, aiming to address foreign bribery and bribe solicitation. In other words, really trying to show leadership from the government side to the private sector. And what can that look like? Well, one way that we've seen it with many countries also from the region is to include collective action in their national anti-corruption strategies. And putting it there is a starting step towards actually encouraging the private sector also to take leadership role and start thinking about how they can engage maybe with companies in the same sector, with their supply chains, with smaller and medium-sized companies, to say, what do we think an integrity and compliance program looks like based on the OECD standards? How do you implement a whistleblowing hotline? How do you conduct investigations? What does conflict of interest mean in our industry sector? And by having those discussions and sharing those thoughts and practical approaches, you can actually start developing best practices within particular sectors. And there are civil society organizations that will help, government agencies that will have views on this, and anti-corruption standards and so on. So these are all ways that I think that you can start tackling what looks like an enormous set of requirements by sort of breaking them down into smaller components and starting the dialogue, starting the consultation, and starting to be more open, in short, by bringing these things into the discussion. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Gemma. Lana, let's look closer at our region, Ukraine and other countries of Eastern Europe, Central Asia. How do you see the potential and also the challenges for implementing these recommendations from the business side?
Thank you very much, Olga. Let me maybe first start with the question how the war influenced the anti-corruption agenda in Ukraine, just to make like a short overview for everybody. This is, of course, my personal view, which I shape from my communication with businesses, with civil societies, and with state government authorities. So first of all, one factor which influenced, I would say, a more slow regime of anti-corruption agenda during the war is very simple. Many people from the anti-corruption agencies and from the civil society just are engaged in the war, in military actions physically. So there is a certain shortage of personnel, so to say, those who used to be very active in the anti-corruption actions before. The second one, unfortunately, not, I would say, like this is also the result of manipulation with the war itself. It's called in Ukraine nenachasi, but in English it can be translated like it's not the right time to do something with anti-corruption agenda now, because now we all are engaged in the war and this is our priority. And maybe partly it's true, of course, our priority is to save the country itself physically. But on the other hand, what we can see that sometimes based on this argument, we have a certain way back in the anti-corruption initiatives. I'm talking about, for example, the law which allowed the public officials not to declare, not to report their statements about their profits. Of course, now we have the discussions to revert it back, but still, so under this argument, we see the trend, to reduce the bureaucracy, but at the same time to reduce the control, and that's the issue. Also, there were some changes in the law on public procurements, which allowed to procure a lot of things, omitting any public procurement procedures which used to be in Ukraine. Now we also have discussions to revert it back. So this is just. Sorry, can you please mute? Yeah, thank you. So this is just two examples, but there are many of them. When the government says that it's not the right time to think now about anti-corruption. But in my opinion, in the opinion of different businesses, it's high time to think not only about external security, but also about the internal security as well. But there are also positive developments recently, and this is also thanks to our international partners and thanks to OECD itself, of course. This is first of all the anti-corruption strategy, which has been adopted finally. And it sets like a very good anti-corruption agenda for the next 4 years. And there was a separate deputy of chairman of the National Agency on Prevention of Corruption appointed for this role to like somehow to consolidate efforts among the on the anti-corruption strategy. Also a very big thing, maybe no. To be in Ukraine, you know, when you see it from Ukraine, it's really a very big thing that the head of the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office has been finally appointed, and it was 2 years of delay with this. And with this final step, we now have like a full shape, I would say, of the new anti-corruption bodies, which intensify their activities, and we see now the results already during the last even several months of war. There were like 13, if I'm not mistaken, it was the statistics as of August, 13 big cases prosecuted and considered in the high anti-corruption court. Which is very important for Ukraine because, you know, before those new anti-corruption agencies were established, we had very rare cases when some higher ranking officials have been brought to justice for corruption, unfortunately. So now we have a positive trend, and we hope that this trend will be the same further. One more positive trend is zero tolerance to corruption in the society, and it became not, you know, fancy to be to deal with corruption. And this is a very important thing because all the anti-corruption initiatives today are driven from the society, from the business, rather than from the government, unfortunately, and with the help of our international partners. What we see also, I think this is a little bit different from other countries. The business itself becomes also a part of civil society in this regard. So in Ukraine, the strong anti-corruption initiatives are driven by business, not only by, you know, ordinary civil society organizations, NGOs, etc. Business combines its efforts in different business associations, in different collective action initiatives like Ukrainian Network of Integrity and Compliance. And even now in the UNIC, we see that UNIC started as the initiatives which drives anti-corruption agenda for business itself. And now we see the demand from our members to extend our initiative to broader environment, to government, to state-owned enterprises. And we start this way already. So this is why, you know, big hope and motivation. I really think that Ukraine will be successful in fighting corruption, just because we see that the society and the business is not tolerant anymore, right? And we see that we already have quite a good experience in cooperation with our international partners who drive this anti-corruption agenda in Ukraine. And one more word about the incentives of effective compliance instruments. Just to say a few words which will, I think, somehow support the recommendations which have been described. So first of all, we have the draft law, and me and my team were engaged in developing this draft law, by which we want to introduce the anti-corruption obligations into our law system as a separate, so to say, sanction on the one hand, and on the other hand, as a separate part of the DPA, this non-trial resolution instrument. But it is something different, maybe in comparison to other countries. Why? Because in Ukraine, we still have a big problem with the pressure of the I would say, illegal pressure of the law enforcement authorities on the business. When certain investigative actions, when certain cases are taken as a basis for very massive investigative actions in the businesses, intervening in ordinary business activities. And we want by this law to somehow provide a new instrument on the one hand for the businesses to disclose all the information which may be useful for the investigations. And on the other hand, from the state authorities to take the commitment not to move forward with these investigative actions, which may be harmful for the businesses. So this is like such a kind of agreement based on the DPA. This is our idea, and I hope that we'll be able to move this forward. This is not an easy task. Because it's unusual for Ukrainian law system, but we'll see. And one more important initiative is to have the certification on compliance in Ukraine, which, and not like, only as a voluntary instrument, which may be not so much effective and developed in Ukraine, but to introduce some incentives for introduction of the compliance certification. For example, to facilitate the negotiations with banks on credit terms, or providing some, additional argument for the different inspections, like to reduce, which will reduce risk and risk-based approach by the inspections. This is like an ideas, and they are now discussed also with the government. So hopefully we will be able to introduce them, and maybe also to make such a showcase for other countries as well, something new. So this is in short, which I wanted to share with you, and I will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Lana. If I may react, I think I'm very, very much impressed, by listening to your presentation about Ukraine, the country that is now defending the freedom of itself and the freedom of Europe on the fronts. And despite this immense tragic situation for the country, immense pressure, it's really impressive to see that despite that, the country is thinking about the future. It's thinking about how to rebuild the country in a different and clean way. And already the actions that you mentioned that were taken during the war are very impressive. That's the anti-corruption strategy that was adopted, the continuous operation of the high anti-corruption court that deals with high-level corruption, and that's during the war. That's very impressive. The fact that UNIC continues to operate, and that not a single company left UNIC, and that you are continuing to develop this draft law that you described about the specific approach to possible DPAs in Ukraine, and the search for additional incentives. I think that should inspire all countries in our region to think about the same tools, and to remember what you said, that there is now a zero tolerance for corruption in Ukraine, and that's really impressive, because the country is emancipating, and people are becoming, from normal people, they are turning into citizens. That's, of course, is an immense transformation for the country. But maybe let's look into some of the issues that you mentioned. For example, this draft DPA. Let's call it like this, draft DPA law. At the same time, you said how difficult it is to implement something like that in Ukraine, because our law enforcement system is not yet what we want it to be. And we still have a legal pressure of law enforcement systems on companies. At the same time, you mentioned certification as a possible tool for providing incentives, for example, for banking or inspections. Maybe I want to come back to Gemma now and get your views on these approaches and share with us the experience of other countries. What are the pluses and minuses of those DPA systems on the one hand? What are the possibilities of such tools in countries where enforcement is not perfect? And on the other hand, this positive incentives. Do we see any good examples somewhere? How do they work? Gemma.
Thank you. May I just add my thanks also to Lana for giving this very broad overview, which is very encouraging, but also quite open about the challenges that are still and clearly there in very, very difficult circumstances. So I think it's appreciated by everybody. What I think is worth remembering is that there are those that are looking beyond the war and looking to reconstruction. And when you say there's zero tolerance by society for corruption, clearly trust in government, which is high at the moment, will need to continue into the future. And trust in government is undermined, as we know, by corruption. So this is key that it continues to be addressed despite the really difficult circumstances. So to go to the question, I think that you mentioned the fact that really it's the private sector that's taking the lead here in fighting corruption. And that is very important because they are the ones who can really change the game. And so by encouraging the private sector to take the lead and to get together and figure out the best ways to ensure that companies really do demonstrate integrity through openness, through having programs, through having reporting systems, even when they lack the personnel, then find cross-cutting teams across the organization to come together to continue the work of implementing robust integrity and compliance programs. It can be done even when resources are reduced. In terms of the draft law that you're discussing, I think this is very interesting. And what we have seen, particularly in certification of compliance programs in other countries, is that there can be risks with this because, of course, the big question is always who is doing the certifying, and to make sure that the certification process is clean and not also disrupted or ruined by corruption by just buying the certification is really key. And what we also really want to see a change, I think, not only in Ukraine, but probably in other countries in the region and more broadly, is a shift away from tick the box. So when you have a certification program, there is a risk that companies are eager to get certified and will put in place what we call a tick the box program because it looks good enough and you can get it certified and then you can get your access to credit, as you said, or reduced number of inspections and so on. So building in safeguards and incentives into how that certification is obtained and how the process is managed, I think, to make it credible for investors, for the future, for reconstruction by society and everybody else is really important. And I don't want to name names of countries, but we have seen places where, particularly with the ISO 37001 standard, is taken and is certified against, not really being to the standards of what I would say the OECD is aiming for in its guidance documents. So, for example, ISO standard allows for partial certification of an organization. And if you're going to have a comprehensive and global program that really is effective, I personally don't believe that certifying one small part of a business really is sufficient. And if that gives you incentives and access to preferential treatment, I'm skeptical that that's also credible in the wider world. So looking at what does certification cover, how is it obtained, and really ensuring that maybe coming together with other companies to figure out really what is good certification is something that is worth spending some time on. We have seen, just to give you examples, local certification that isn't ISO focused in terms of collective action actually being quite an interesting model. It's been seen in Thailand, it's developing in Indonesia and in Vietnam, but basically it really is homegrown. What do we really need to make sure we have a robust program? Maybe it's not everything that's in the ISO standard, or certain elements are stronger than others. And then it's certified locally by a credible organization. And that's the sort of setup that could help to bring trust. I mean, UNIC and the Business Ombudsman Council are clearly reputable organizations that have a lot to build on and to offer in these sorts of situations. So I think it's great work. I think that there are models out there that can provide examples and also warning signs to what can be developed in Ukraine. But I take my hat off to you for all the work that is ongoing, and really I'm impressed too. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Just one comment. We fully understand that this is not an easy task, and we have to make to introduce some preventive measures, not to make from this instrument another corruption, so to say. So there should be some balance, you know. On the one hand, not to make it too much monopolized by the state, and on the other hand, you know, to welcome some competition, but at the same time, there should be some standards, some minimum standards for this type of certification, and they should be based on the best international practice, of course.
Thanks a lot, Lana. I think I wouldn't continue with the questions from myself to you, because I think we have covered quite a lot of ground and started a good discussion for our region. I would only like to invite our attendants, participants, to send questions to us in the chat. We will then try to answer them further. And with this, I'm happy to pass on to the next session. Tanya, it's to you.
Thank you very much, Oda. And I will ask Irakli to take the lead on the second session.
Thank you, Tanya. So our second session today is centered on the second business integrity survey, second survey of business integrity in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which was conducted by OECD ASEAN through an online questionnaire in 2021. It followed up on the first survey, which was conducted in 2016, and whose results were reflected in the report, which was also published in 2016. And so the main purpose and objective of this second survey was to track the progress compared to the situation, compared to the findings of the first survey in 2016, and also to highlight some of the emerging practices in the region. The survey covered 9 countries and 10 governments, 11 business associations, and 16 companies from these 9 across the 9 countries took part in the survey. So given our limited time frame today, without taking much time, I will give floor to Mr. Liutas Jurkonis, who, as a consultant to OECD ASEAN, analyzed the findings, the results of this survey, and produced the report, which has been released today. So after our discussion, if you're interested in looking at the results of the survey in greater detail, you can also access the report and see the full results of the survey on our website. So, Liutas, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me, and it's a real honor and pleasure to be here. Also, Irakli, thank you very much for giving some of the space for me, already presenting the methodology and the objectives of the study. So I'll not stop here and jump directly into the results of the survey. Maybe here, just a little intro about how we structured the presentation. I think that it was Patrick who mentioned that we have already presented the preliminary results last year. So the focus of mine during today's presentation will be more on the key recommendations rather than the findings themselves. So let me start with the first piece of the analysis that we have done. And as most already on the introductory presentations noted, that we focused on risk analysis and the risk assessment, just to understand what are the biggest risks, what is the general business climate in the region that we analyzed. Now, the key takeaway for us is that we still see, surprisingly, that we do have a general lack of understanding for business integrity risks in the region. Even more, I would say that when we would think about how to best understand the business climate in any country or organization, you would start from the risk assessment. Unfortunately, this is exactly what we're lacking in most of the countries, and these are only the few exceptions that we have seen that countries would, before getting into the policy recommendations or drafting of the laws, would get into the risk business integrity risk assessments. What is even more interesting, if we would analyze the graphs here, and concerning, I would say, that we see that governments appear to hold very optimistic view regarding the state affairs in their countries. So they are both more positive compared to businesses and business associations when it comes to the business integrity climate, whether their countries are prone to corruption or not. And also very much more positive about the improvements that were happening for the last 5 years compared to 2016 with the first issue of the business integrity survey. So the key recommendations on this end are very, very simple. Risk assessment is not a tick the box exercise. This should be a tool for the governments, for the companies, to really understand why and how the business integrity compliance management measures could be adapted, that these would not be a paper documents, but a real instruments for the organizations. And therefore, so risk assessments, business integrity surveys, all of the discussions that could and should happen with, as Nicolas said, with business as partners was Dragos, right? So engage, understand, and only when you understand the platform that you are standing on, then move to the implementation of any tools that would make sense and be not only the paper. So the second question, or the key question that we were looking at is really to understand, so which is the party, or what is the corner that is most sensitive, presenting the highest risk of integrity? And no surprise here, and no change, unfortunately, here. So the public authorities, the politicians, are seen as the biggest source of corruption-related risks. Again, unfortunately, we see that the government efforts in this area remain largely inadequate, and they did not change. So the positive maybe note here is that during the 5 years, we've seen that some of the governments have taken the quick wins on the smaller areas of the corruption, which is good, but the large-scale corruption is still not being tackled as it would have been expected. And this is also led by a couple of other supplementing factors: the enforcement, the lack of attention and the trust as well to the relevant law enforcement authorities. Again, so linking this to the key recommendations, so it is understood that the focus on the quick wins is an easy way out. It improves the reputation across the other countries, but high-level corruption should not be forgotten. Even more, it should become the priority for any government, because only then it will indeed change the climate, business integrity climate in any country. So with that said, lobbying should be the focus of the attention. Improvement of the enforcement practices would be something also worth looking at. And some of the tools are now very much widely discussed, like whistleblowing protection, non-judicial mechanism for the enforcing of anti-corruption efforts. So there are many, many tools which are echoed in the recommendations, which were mentioned by Dragos, but I'm sure that this will be reflected also in the business integrity indicators that will be discussed later on. Now, if we go forward, governmental assistance to companies. So basically, we were trying to understand what are the measures taken to promote business integrity. And I think that you see the graph here of what was said by the governments that naming the areas that they're assisting the companies in. But I think that the highlight of mine would be the open data. So business environment is, and then organizations, but also the governmental sector now have huge amounts of data, which is mainly used for business making decisions. But this is a wonderful source to really understand and analyze the situation within business integrity perspective as well. So again, when we think, so how to best utilize the data that we have, so opening this data, and just few examples could be the public procurement. It could also lead to UBO, ultimate beneficiary ownership identification, just to understand, so who are our counterparties? So yes, KYC, know your client, know your customer concept was very much embedded into the financial sector, but we see and would recommend that this would be a standard norm applied in for every business, because this and only this would help us to understand, so what is the third party that we are working with, and whether we are making sure that this is a transparent way of doing business. So when we are talking about the promotion of business integrity, we also look not only the governmental sector, but also about the private sector. And here I think that we do see a repeating message that promotion of business integrity is largely focused on punitive measures, and the attention to positive incentives is really almost non-existent. So here we would say that the balanced approach between the stick and the carrot, stick and the cookie should be there, because we are now chasing businesses with sticks. And then the question is, okay, we will implement the compliance measures that are needed if we are forced to. But the question is whether we would try to make it real, or whether this would be a window dressing exercise only. So the key recommendation out of this goes on really thinking about the practical integrity, business integrity incentives for businesses, whether this would be in public procurement, whether this would be the non-trial resolutions, whether this would be tax incentives, but it should be a practical way for the companies to say that, yes, this makes sense for us to invest our energy and money to make this really happen. And for business associations, I think that they are the wonderful source to promote business integrity, to share the good practices, and be the leaders in really saying what works and inspire the businesses across the association and beyond. Now, the last slide and the last piece of results that I wanted to share is about the effectiveness of compliance measures established. And here we see that, honestly, businesses are not very optimistic about the effectiveness of all the tools that they have. So yes, most of them, almost 100% of our respondents said that they do have the codes of ethics, they do have the policies and procedures, they do have the whistleblowing hotlines. But when it comes to the question, so whether they are effective, we see that the companies say that yes, maybe to some extent they are. Of course, they help at some extent, but they are not the effective tool that business would rely on. And the same and even more skeptical view is echoed by the business associations, right? The graph that you will find in the report, of course, here is also very interesting when we try to drill down and say, so how many legal actions did you have? How many investigations have you started for the last 2 years? And you can see that 64% would say that either we don't know or that they were not initiated. So here, I think the focus on the effectiveness, not on the paper implementation, but about the effective implementations of all the tools and measures is key. So for governments, I think that auditing standards, not only focusing on the financial audits, but non-financial audits, firstly, is a must. What also could be very inspirational by governments, that they would become the ambassadors of business integrity within the state-owned enterprises. So this could be a perfect example to inspire the private businesses that say that if governments do invest into business integrity, we will follow. So for the companies, I think that integration and focus on the effectiveness of the tools, saying that this is not the cost, but what value can we get from business integrity is the key question to ask, and to the key question how this business integrity measures could be transformed to the value creation. And just to repeat what I said already about the business association, assistance is the key expectation there by sharing the good examples, by sharing the good practices. So to sum it up, conclude on the recommendations, unfortunately, we see that comprehensive and effective business integrity endeavors are still an exception rather than a rule. So we do believe that by sharing the information, by sharing the good practices, this could inspire and then could move those initiatives forwards. It is also understood that both governments and companies do have the limitations of their resources, both monetary, fiscal, but also people-wise. So establishing the platforms where experience could be shared and effectiveness could be promoted is very much important. And data is something that we could and should utilize much more as a source of the information, but also as the source of the automated, investigative, compliance-driven solutions as well. So share, care, and be data-driven. I think that this is where we will see a change. So with this slide, I wanted to leave you with a smile on the face a little bit. On the left side, repeating the key recommendations areas, but also repeating a very blunt but also known phrase: substance over form is a key for me for the next 5 years, when I'm sure we will continue and repeat the survey, that we will see a shift from the form, from the policies, to really the effective implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liudas, for this very interesting and concise presentation of the extensive data which the survey produced. Now, one important, well, a lot of important findings of this survey that stood out to me, for example, when I was reading them, is the various challenges that the governments are facing in terms of risk assessment, in terms of enforcement, in terms of finding proper incentives to prompt businesses to invest more in integrity and compliance, the challenges in terms of collecting and releasing data that will, the access to which will help promote business integrity, and generally establishing effective and productive collaboration with the private sector. So a lot of the key findings, a lot of the important findings are about the things that the governments are doing or are not doing in the region in terms of business integrity. So for this reason, we decided to have as the first speaker on this panel a representative of one of the public anti-corruption agencies from our region, Mr. Serhii Derkac, who is the head of the Corruption Prevention and Detection Department at the National Agency for Corruption Prevention of Ukraine. Sergey, first of all, on my own behalf and on behalf of our team, I would like to thank you for finding time to join our discussion at this very difficult time for your country. We appreciate this very much. And kind of following up on Liudas's presentation and on the different challenges that he mentioned, which the governments are facing. Could you please tell us briefly, based on your experience and your agency's experience, on what have been some of the achievements and what have been some of the problems, some of the most significant problems and challenges in terms of promoting business integrity in your country?
Thank you very much, Irakli, and thank you very much, colleague. It's an honor for me to be here and to speak from the behalf of Ukrainian government and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Agency. I will try to make it in short because we have really too much stuff going on here in Ukraine, and even in this situation, we are trying to keep the state strong, because we do understand that if we are keeping as much stronger the state, it's easier for us also and our fighters next to our border. So we are doing our, let's say mandate. In terms of the anti-corruption stuff, as you probably know, that the real impetus to the development of anti-corruption compliance and culture of integrity in Ukraine was given back in 2014, when we have a reform done and when we have the law of corruption prevention was adopted, and we had that at that time the legal frame of corruption prevention for the public and for the both public and private sector was set, and stipulated requirements for internal anti-corruption programs and anti-corruption officers. And there actually the law said that National Agency on Corruption Prevention, which I represent right now, should be created with the policy making and methodological, let's say, mandate. So 8 years passed here in Ukraine, and definitely legislation has undergone several waves of amendments, and actually some trends have emerged. And there is no doubt that the notion of integrity has been gaining more and more followers, and the issue of reputation and ethics in the spotlight nowadays. One topic which I need to mention right now is anti-corruption strategy. Colleagues today mentioned already about anti-corruption strategy, and the strategy was adopted by the parliament, which is a good sign. It was planned for 2025, so we have like several years ahead. And now actually the time that we need to look back and identify the areas of our success and challenges in tackling corruption issues and consider the way forward. So now it's the time. I need sadly actually to say that this turning point is dramatically shaded by the war and the underlying challenges, not only for the future for the compliance in Ukraine, but for the country itself. But anyway, I mean, talking about the strategy, I will mention about this way forward for the strategy a bit later, but I need to say several, let's say, success stories about Ukraine and let's say the role of the state institutions and the government itself in promoting integrity and in business as well. So, and what is exactly our role? So the first thing I need to say that the government declares commitment to continue with the corporate governance reform to state-owned enterprises, and we can really see it. It's not only words from our prime minister, we can see it with the real actions. In terms of our mandate, the NAPC, we have like two really new ways, I mean, new directions of operation that we created. The one is strategic risk assessment. It's the risk assessment in priority areas of national economy and public governance. For the several years, for the last 2 years, let's say, we scrutinized several areas, for example, like land resources, infrastructure, and here we are working with the, for example, strategic corruption risk assessment in the state-owned enterprises. The one of the biggest one in Ukraine is Ukrainian Railways. And then we were working with the corruption risk assessment with another state-owned enterprise from the defense sector. It's the Ukroboronprom. And we issued the comprehensive corruption risk assessment with the concrete risk, and we provide recommendations to mitigation measures. And the good actually result of this exercise was that we set a plan, the real plan, which was signed by the head of NACP and the heads of the agencies and state-owned enterprises with the concrete mitigating actions and deadlines. And we are monitoring how it's done. So it's the good example of how the government institutions can work together and with the state-owned enterprises by identifying the corruption risk and then mitigating them. Another point shortly, it's about corruption proofing of draft legislation. We have a mandated task for the NACP to scrutinize all the draft legislation. And in terms of corporate governance, we see that a lot of changes are sometimes the government is trying to pass or like some ministries trying to pass in terms of the, for example, in the statute, in terms of the appointment procedures of the CEOs of the companies, or supervisory boards members, or other stuff. So we, at that time, while we are looking at the draft legislation, we identifying also corruption risk, and we are trying to actually to stop the legislation which goes apart from the main corporate governance principles which were set by OECD, and also if we see corruption risks. So, for example, for the first half of this year, we analyzed almost 2,000 draft regulations which were sent to the government for approval. So it's the huge number of the documents that we are looking at. Another issue that I want to say is that what we are working with is specifically is methodological support to the anti-corruption officers. We have in Ukraine approximately up to 15,000 compliance officers, anti-corruption compliance officers working in the public sector, in the local administrations, and in the private sector. So this is the huge number of people which actually needs the support from the government. And we see our role, and the law actually prescribes that we need to do the methodological support. So what we've done last year, we actually adopted the professional standard for the anti-corruption officer. So actually to promote the position of anti-corruption officer, it's good for the, for example, heads of institutions, for the HR services, that now they know whom to hire, what are the qualifications, and what kind of tasks should the anti-corruption officer do. Shortly about other two, success, I would say, stories that we are working with. We submitted the model anti-corruption program to the Ministry of Justice, and it was approved. So we have for the country now model anti-corruption program for all legal entities. So all the private sector can also use it. And it's based on the international standards. It covers all the topics of ethics, starting from the top, corruption risk assessment, conflict of interest, whistleblowing, and so on. And additionally to this, we also approved the methodology of risk management. So this is also another legal document which is approved by the Ministry of Justice. And for example, public institutions should use it mandatorily, but the business companies can use it by their own. So lastly, I will speak about some small IT tools that we are working with. The one is about whistleblowing, because we are looking at the whistleblowing protection. We have more than 100 cases of whistleblowing protection done by the NACP, and by the end of the year, we are planning to launch IT tool for whistleblowing. It's whistleblowing portal where all the citizens can report through the one channel, and it also can be used. It will be used actually by the law by state-owned enterprises, but the private sector can also use this whistleblowing portal if there will be the need. And lastly, we created another IT tool specifically for the anti-corruption compliance officers for their professional development. It's the anti-corruption portal where we have all the necessary resources and information for their work listed there, all the online courses that we are creating, and all of this stuff, it's there. So this is another tool which we can actually share with all our colleagues, because I think lots of information is there. And I mean, we are one of the good stuff there is also the methodology of evaluation of effectiveness of anti-corruption officers, because it's very difficult to actually see how effective anti-corruption officers in the country. And last year we evaluated almost 4,000 anti-corruption officers and ranked them for the work they've done. This is shortly about small success stories. I will just mention about like several challenges, because we have really lots of challenges in terms of the working with the business entities. We have, for example, the vague legal criteria subject to which business entities are obliged to implement anti-corruption programs, and there is no liability if there is no anti-corruption program. So we have now big risk that many of the companies just don't pay much attention to the anti-corruption measures and anti-corruption programs. And from the NAPC perspective, it's the challenge that we don't have enough resources actually to check all the companies, even the state-owned enterprises, because we have a huge number of them, how the anti-corruption compliance systems are set in those companies. We have no actually feasible notion in Ukrainian legislation on corporate liability for the corrupt misconduct. We don't have like incentives to business committed to integrity and doing business ethically. And it was mentioned earlier that we have quite a weak law enforcement mechanism actually, which would help us to promote business integrity. So this is the very short introduction from my side. Of course, the biggest challenge that we have right now is the war and this drastic impact on business activity in Ukraine, that it's really difficult time for everyone and for business as well. So that's why like compliance system are also struggling. But we are optimistic in all ways. And thanks for OECD for the support. Yeah, so this is shortly, colleagues, from my side.
Thank you, Serhiy. So what you said, there were a couple of encouraging developments that you mentioned, such as the risk assessment is obviously state-owned enterprises and the methodological support offered to compliance officers, because these initiatives actually address some of the key difficulties that our study highlighted. And then the problems and the challenges that you mentioned are in many ways quintessential for the entire region, because these are the challenges that keep reappearing in survey answers from different countries. So thank you for this very interesting short presentation. One thing that the survey highlighted is the importance of collective action and the importance of providing the private sector with proper incentives for investing in compliance, because experience shows that the existing body of research shows that there is often a lack of both resources and motivation in the companies to invest in integrity, to invest in compliance, and that's actually where collective action initiatives step in and can play an important role. And so with this, we move on to our second speaker today, Ms. Giedrė Bielskite from the Lithuanian Clearwave Initiative, which is a collective action initiative established in 2007 and uniting about, if I'm not mistaken, 80 different companies, and awarding the Clearwave label, which kind of represents and symbolizes integrity and compliance and responsible conduct. So, Ms. Bielskite, based on your experience, first of all, what was the motivation for the establishment of the initiative? Based on the knowledge, on the experience which has accumulated over the years of the initiative's existence, what works and what doesn't work in terms of promoting and incentivizing integrity in the private sector, and what have been some of the significant changes that you would highlight that have occurred over this period of time?
Hello all, it's an honor to be here and to discuss to you all these important topics that we are working already for 15 years. In Lithuania, the initiative was created by business association investors forum, when the biggest investing companies in Lithuania has started uniting and promoting the healthy business environment, the healthy regulation, and transferring good practice from Western countries to Lithuania. And while working in this environment, they spotted the problem of the transparent business, anti-corruption measures, but they spotted like not in the absence of the measures from the government, well, of course, a bit of that, but as well as the itself business conduct. And companies were trying to figure out how to promote this transparent business conduct and this responsible business conduct for the whole business environment, business society. So that's how this initiative was created, and it's very timely. Was very timely initiative because, you know, in 2008 we had an economic crisis. So as the consequence of the crisis, economic difficulties downtown, the companies are usually are quite eager to go to the shadow economy, and this how transparency in the country is decreasing. I agree with the research that was showed by Liudas Jurkonis. We spot all the problems in Lithuania. Of course, I understand that the amount of amount of these problems, or the level of these problems, I would say that currently we are maybe really less than 50 years ago, but still we have a really low awareness, still low awareness of the business, why they should act transparent and integrity way, why should they have some basic documents for as a conduct, business conduct, ethics documents. So we are constantly working and trying to unite this transparent business, as we think that the best way of encouraging business to do that is to show good example, and through the good practice of, let's say, starting from the bigger businesses coming to Lithuania, and later on this practice has cascaded down to the smaller business, is to show example and to show in their practice the benefits of this business conduct. So what is working from our side is creating the forum for transparent companies, for responsible companies, to share their experience, to share their practices, and to show what is the best way to do these developments. As for example, small business usually return with question, oh, but I'm small business, I don't know what kind of, I don't know, code of ethics I should have or how it should look. So the larger companies, they share their the documents, they share their documents. Of course, they are online and they are publicized, but still you have to very tackle this problem. And here is the ethic documents. You can copy with pride and use it. And we think that though sometimes it really becomes like a, tickle the box that I have the document, that I have some business conduct procedures, but still it makes the company itself to think why I need this, why I should have it, and by investing that time, at least in this official part, they think about the problem, and they usually take the other actions as well. So firstly, it's a forum. Secondly, we offer a tool for measuring the progress of our members. of their business conduct and this transparent activities. So they have very clear, documents where they have to check, do I have this document? Do I have business conduct document? Do I have ethics document? Do I have some, do I need or do I have some, I don't know, to have a whistleblower service in my company? Do I have internal procedures? How do I treat partners? Do I request or require from them the same transparency and business integrity? So it's like the prepared tackle is for them to see in what level they are. And of course, our forum, what is our Clear Wave, is also very good forum, not only for business inside in the business community for discussions, but also to raise this question to governmental institutions, to raise this question to other business associations, as still we are the only one organization or initiative in Lithuania which raises the awareness, which works with the businesses, with companies. As well, we have our focus on the citizens and people itself, raising awareness, what are the benefits, for example, not buying, I don't know, illegal products, or why it's useful to get the paycheck or to get the check from your, I know, hairdresser, that people still have low understanding why it is beneficial for themselves, because this chain is quite difficult to understand for them.
Thank you, Kendra. So
one more, if I may, one more remark. Also, we have this labeling project where our companies that participate in our initiative can label their products and services, and by this and other communication activities, we promote this transparency and business integrity and responsibility idea in country, as well as among the business and among our citizens and people.
thank you. In terms of the importance of labeling and certification, the survey also, one of the things that the survey showed is that actually reputation is possibly the single most important motivation for companies, for those companies that choose to invest in compliance and in business integrity. And actually the results of, at the very least, the results of our survey show that reputation is usually a more significant motivation than, for example, fear of sanctions. So in that respect, that also highlights the importance of this type of collective actions and activities. The survey had quite a broad geographic reach also. It's stretched from Eastern Europe all the way to Central Asia. And so our next speaker has the experience from the Central Asian geographical context, Mr. Farukh Abdullakhanov, who is partner at KPMG Uzbekistan, and in that capacity and in other capacities has the experience of working to help companies build compliance programs and internal anti-corruption mechanisms. So Farukh, I would like to ask you to briefly talk to us about your experience in this context, in this kind of thematic and geographical context, on what are some of the most effective ways to help companies build internal anti-corruption mechanisms, and of course, what are the significant challenges that you have faced there?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Irakli. Do you hear me well? Yeah, thank you for inviting to this event. It's a great honor. My name is Farukh Abdullakhanov. I'm a partner, head of forensic group in Caspian region at KPMG. and since 2020, I'm working in Uzbekistan, and we have a number of larger projects on implementing anti-corruption compliance in state-owned enterprises, in government authorities, ministries, and agencies, as well in general compliance measures in banks and local companies. So in terms of Uzbekistan, I would say maybe I would divide my speech into two parts. First part would be about the local context, what drives the market, companies, and government to implement effective compliance measures, and what challenges. Second part would be what challenges Uzbekistan companies and government authorities have. So currently, Uzbekistan is has number of great reforms and improvement of economy and improvement of infrastructure, etc., and attracting investment. So one of the key drivers to implement modern, effective compliance systems in companies, in government authorities, is actually the task set up by government and understood by all the people, is to attract huge investments to modernize the economy and to improve the trade, exports, and local production. And we see that during recent years, say 2-3 years, the compliance function and the term compliance was implemented in Uzbekistan. So before that, say 5 years or 10 years ago, nobody understood what is compliance about. But now people are knowing, understanding, and starting implementing it. But still, there are some kind of challenges and some challenges faced, I would say, by local companies. So coming back to the Sergei's speech, he told that in Ukraine there are about 15,000 compliance officers, professional compliance officers. I would say in Uzbekistan, with a population of about 35 million people, the real professional compliance officers, the number of compliance officers is still low, and there is a lack of professional people on the ground, but we see a lot of efforts from international organizations, donors, from the government authorities, from the anti-corruption agency of Uzbekistan, to quickly implement all these measures and teach people and do this qualifications of compliance people, implement standards, international standards of anti-corruption compliance, anti-bribery compliance, and overall general compliance. Also, what we see is a huge efforts in terms of the education of people, and we recently launched one of the projects which the coordinator of the project is a United Nations Development Program in Uzbekistan, and under this project we develop teaching and learning materials for teachers, for schools, for higher education organizations, and for general prosecutor's office and law enforcement agencies, and also for judges, how to work, what compliance is about, how to implement effective compliance measures, etc. And also we develop the train the trainer materials in order to boost this expertise on the ground. Also, one of the challenges we see that being faced by state-owned enterprises in Uzbekistan is a huge transformation agenda. So given that most of the economy of Uzbekistan is still being state-owned, and big oil and gas companies, electricity companies, transport companies, banks, and metallurgical companies are still state-owned, and there is a high pressure to quickly privatize them. They are under this transformational program, and they are currently implementing ERP systems, Smes systems, etc. And also changing their corporate governance structure, inviting non-executive directors and implementing compliance and internal audit functions. And I would say that in Uzbekistan, it's kind of beginning or maybe somewhere in the middle of the journey to implement modern governance, risk and compliance systems. And also companies, especially state-owned enterprises, they are facing the lack of information. Therefore, those companies are not able at this point of time to implement risk-based approach to manage their compliance risks. But we see that under these huge transformational programs, those companies already planned and started implementing different solutions and already implemented compliance policies and procedures. But still, in order to have it effective and risk-based, they need to gather, collect, and analyze the data they have. Because all these companies, they have a lot of people working, 10, 20, 30,000 employees who create those risks, actually. Also, generally speaking, I would say that Uzbekistan had made huge reforms in terms of tax regulation. A couple of years ago, tax code was changed significantly. And one of the interesting things, beginning from this year, the tax authorities, they give cashback of 1% to each buyer. And if you get the fiscal check, if you buy anything in a cafe, restaurant, hotel, whatever, in the shop, all the buyers can scan their QR code on this fiscal check and get 1% cashback from the government, from the tax authorities. So this is implemented in order to decrease the shadow economy and to improve the tax and fiscal culture of people. So I would say this is also kind of anti-corruption measure in order to make the economy more transparent, and improve the business integrity. Also, we see that the customs, state customs agency, they also do a lot to digitalize their customs services. And in terms of current situation, there is a huge impact on the logistic in the region, and we see that customs are doing a lot of efforts. And also recently, Uzbek customs management was visiting Georgia to see how the customs services were implemented in Georgia, also in terms of the decreasing the corruption risk. Other than that, there is a huge transformation in the medicine and in the medicine sector, and in hospitals, etc. They are doing digitalization of their services, as well as in the public services sector. There was a significant change, and almost more than half public services were digitalized, and each person, each citizen may get the services via their smartphone and computer. So country is significantly changes, but there are still a lot of pressure and a lot of challenges. And to summarize my speech, I would say that one of the key challenges are lack of people, lack of expertise, lack of data in order to implement risk-based approach. And I would agree with the alluders about the paper compliance that we see during our work with local companies and government authorities, that still management and people, they treat the compliance is more kind of ticking the box rather than changing the culture. And what we also recommend to local government authorities, board of directors, is to implement the tone at the top principle. So this is one of the key principles that would effectively drive the compliance culture and business integrity culture in the region. So if you will have any questions, I'm ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Faruk. A further lesson that we can draw is that where there is a lack of capacity and a lack of knowledge in terms of developing compliance and integrity programs, joint efforts and collaboration between governments and international organizations and various actors from the private sector can actually create synergies that help build this knowledge and experience where it is lacking. Could probably continue this interesting conversation on this subject, but we're well over our time limit for the session, unfortunately. So if anyone has questions, I would invite you to ask them through the chat. And I would pass on the floor to my colleague Alexandra Onisko, who will moderate the next session.
Thank you, Irakli. Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies, gentlemen. I'll be moderating today's session on integrity in small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, which is our last thematic session for today. And as Irakli said, I'll remind everyone that you can use the chat box to ask your questions and we will answer them at the end of the session. So we have discussed today the OECD anti-bribery recommendation and a quite extensive regional study on business integrity trends. And taking into account the volume and the scope of the legal instruments and analytical products that were discussed today, it could be assumed that international anti-corruption legislation is relevant only for something as large and colossal as these policy documents, so that it applies mainly to state-owned enterprises, multinational enterprises, or monopolistic giants. But the reality is that most international standards in the field of business integrity, including the 2021 anti-bribery recommendation, are also applicable to SMEs. However, ethics and compliance do not necessarily need to be on a large scale. So that's why we decided to devote this session to the specificities of promoting integrity in small and medium-sized enterprises. And I would like to give the floor to Ms. Ekaterina Lysova, who is Senior Program Officer at the Center for International Private Enterprise, SIPA, who will let us dive into the question of integrity of small companies by presenting the insights of the recently published SIPA study. So Ekaterina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexandra, and thank you, the ECN, for giving us an opportunity to share the insights of our study. But before moving to the insight section, to takeaway section, I would actually like to mention the reason why we conducted this study and a little bit about the format. And not surprisingly, the reasons are very much aligned or echoed by the recommendations that Liudas mentioned earlier in the session from the survey, meaning learning about anti-corruption efforts, right? Private sector anti-corruption efforts, need for sharing good practices, for good lessons learned, something that really worked. And of course, prioritizing substance over formality, format, and showing how that can be done. So once I published the business integrity guide that was targeted, was designed for SMEs back in 2020, we got a lot of questions from our partners, which are local business associations, chambers of commerce, economic think tank, and universities about, well, that's great. These are the rules that would help companies to build effective compliance systems. But how does it really work in practice? Can you give us some examples of that? And that was the reason that motivated us to reach out to a wide network of partners in Europe and Eurasia region and say, listen, can you find us some business owners who would not just have already implemented some business integrity, business ethics practices in their companies, but also would be willing to speak publicly. And I have to say, it was not an easy exercise. So initially, there were identified about 25 companies. Again, and I'm talking about wide all Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Caucasus, and Central Asia of those companies. But in the end, we ended up for this particular study only with 7 companies, meaning that those 7 business owners could actually provide a full account of their story. And we reached out to our local business integrity experts, people who are global companies. They may not apply, of course, to the smaller companies. And so we asked these questions, exactly the set of questions of how was this ethical position established? And what does it mean for a company to be ethical in the first place? Why did you decide to do business differently? What were the motivations behind it? How was the ethical position promoted among the employees? What were the main challenges to the ethical position of SMEs, and how did you overcome them or continue overcoming those challenges? What worked, what didn't work? What benefits did you get by trying to be more transparent or ethical and compliant? What are the recommendations you can share with others in your positions? And we specifically asked the question about, did the code of conduct work, right? Did, having a lawyer on staff or someone who you can reach out was helpful, or what was the helpful, right? So these are the set of questions we asked through the extended interview process, which took place in the second part of 2021. So that was in the middle of pandemic still, right? We have to understand that created a lot of challenges for a lot of SMEs. And when we talk about SMEs, we're talking about really small companies, from three people company to about 100 people company, right? And we, so I have to say that the main things that, each story is unique, and you can read it. It's on our website. If you just put doing business with integrity, stories of SMEs, you just get right into the account of these stories. Even though, we got stories from Moldova, from Ukraine, from Armenia, Bosnia, Albania, Kyrgyzstan, and so on. So the stories are different. However, there are, of course, some trends that we wanted to identify with the purpose of sharing on the forum like that, and with our partners who look for these insights. But if, as you see, each story is a story about a conflict. Why? Because we are citing renowned physicist and humanist John Zeman, who put it, ethics is not just an abstract intellectual discipline. It's about the conflicts that arise in trying to meet real human needs and values. And if you look at the stories, you see that conflict where business owners and employees have to make or had to make a choice where to succumb to the business as usual approach, right? Or to challenge it, to accept certain risks. And you can see there are certain risks that are professional and personal. And we hope that by reading the stories, looking at those takeaways, many other entrepreneurs, small business owners, will get some support, will be inspired and encouraged to continue with these values and continue to stand by the ethical values and seek support from their communities. So quickly, about 5 takeaways now, of what we could find. The first one, and I have to say that these are stories not just about the effort, it's a continuous effort. Of course, there is no end point. There's no, okay, we achieved that, right? So it's a constant fight. It's a constant debate. It's a constant development. But they believe that they have achieved certain positive changes in their small communities, in the small environments. What helped? Speaking out against corruption and joining forces with other stakeholders, including investors, clients, and social media. So these are 2 factors, and this is what Gemma was talking about, collective action, right? What Drago mentioned before, collective action extremely important. Joining forces, it is that part of collective action. And it turned out that in almost every story emphasized how important, vital, critical it was. And it turned it's not just prevented certain corruption risks and threats, but also turned it into an opportunity for those small businesses. Second, operating formally and transparently allowed SMEs actually obtain a better grasp of their own financial data and administration. And it came as a surprise, rather, right? But it's something that business owners mentioned that was very helpful. And it allowed them to strengthen their own management practices, support growth, and pursue new business opportunities. That has to be highlighted, right, very widely, that it does allow companies to reach out to get additional financial opportunities, to get those credits, to reach out to those global supply chain partners and establish those relationships. It's critical. Third one, building reputation. And several presenters today mentioned that. But building that reputation as a responsible business has not only been instrumental to develop a loyal customer base, and you can see in some examples how that actually allowed people to stay with the small pharmacy in Armenia, yeah, because they believed that the owner is ethical and transparent and honest and takes care about his customers. Also preventing bribery and reducing other regulatory risks. So it also, building reputation allowed companies to reduce brain drain and retain highly skilled staff who value leadership's commitment to business integrity. It's a big thing for many countries where we work in Europe and Eurasia, where those talented people are leaving. They don't want to be involved in any tainted companies and put it on their resume, would stay with them for the rest of their lives. They're thinking ahead about their futures. They want to associate themselves with strong ethical companies. So it's important to keep in mind. On the personal level, doing business in an honest way provided both entrepreneurs and employees with greater peace of mind, right? Not everyone can get bribe and go and sleep calmly after that. And positive working environment, which is also instrumental of keeping talented, future forward-looking staff. And the final point, the fifth one, is a spillover effect. It turned out that those companies that are trying to improve the conditions for themselves, also improving it for everyone else. They're trying to reach out and engage everyone else to engage with them on this side. And what they did, they, for example, developed certain specific, efforts, such as created entrepreneurship courses, right, for young people on how to be compliant and how to be ethical, what the value of it is, and peer mentoring programs, creation of business associations and ethics clubs advocating for policy reforms, and other ways of promoting awareness about the need to do business ethically. So that's kind of the broad takeaways. Probably nothing new, but when you get that voice, the real voice from real people of telling their stories, it sounds very powerful. We hope that you will get it too. And I'm not going to go into the details of every case, but just want to highlight, again, it's all in the report of that. But when you look at certain challenges that a small Moldovan restaurant was dealing with, a lot of bribery challenges they had to overcome, what helped is the publicity, going to media, inviting community leaders together, making it very, very public. That was vital for them to preserve the ethical position. And all 7 stories, FEC, all the insights, the takeaway section, they end with one thing, which is a very big part of this discussion today and the business integrity roundtable, is the regulatory environment. These are incentives that the SMEs need. They're in a very hard position, really hard, in a very hard position, especially after the COVID pandemic. And so they do need that regulatory support, those incentives for those who already have the internal, very strong value standards to continue with that and engage as many people from their communities, public and private, civil society, to move forward to this agenda. Thank you very much again for this great opportunity to share with you this very exciting findings. We will be continuing more, just giving the voice to those people who are fighting for this business integrity, as we said, the business ethics efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Katerina. Thanks for your presentation. You made it clear that the bulk of business in most economies is conducted by SMEs. And while smaller businesses tend to be more flexible and quick to change than large corporates, they are much more vulnerable to downturn in the business environment. They are also more sensitive to harassment from government institutions. And as Ekaterina, you mentioned, collective and joint actions are crucial in supporting SMEs against corruption risks. And I would like to ask Ms. Susan Friedrich, who is Director in Alliance for Integrity, GIZ, from the perspective of international non-governmental organization, how international initiatives can be of help for small companies that have fewer resources for introducing compliance mechanisms, and what are the specificities of work with SMEs? Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra, and thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you. It was really inspiring for me to listen to Ekaterina, and I can really confirm 100% what she was sharing, because we make exactly the same experience when working with SMEs. Maybe I can give you a brief information regarding who we are and what we are doing. We are a business-driven multi-stakeholder initiative working with the private sector, civil society, public organization, and international institutions to promote integrity in the economic system. And we especially provide services for SMEs in emerging countries and developing countries. So far, we are working in 14 countries, not in Eastern Europe or Central Asia so far, maybe in the future. And as a network, we offer a platform that provides opportunities for awareness raising, capacity building, peer learning, and public-private dialogue. So our whole work is based on international standards provided by OECD, for example, UNODC, UN Global Compact, and Transparency International, and they are all represented in our governance structure and our steering committee. And we are financed by German corporation. So as I said at the beginning, one of the pillars of our work is providing capacity to small and medium-sized companies to be able to build up their own compliance management systems, because they have a especially difficult environment and are highly vulnerable to corruption. So the idea is to optimize the SME's business model and hopefully optimize their performance by integrating these integrity considerations into their day-to-day operations and make the business case for integrity by showing that integrity allows them to access better to global supply chains, to access better to capital, as we heard already, and also to have motivated and committed staff. So one of our ways of working is a program which is called From Companies to Companies, where we invite the compliance officers of large companies to become trainers for SMEs, because they have the knowledge and the experience on how to build a compliance management system. But for them, it's very interesting to learn how is the day-to-day work of an SME, because they have maybe very sophisticated tools, but when it comes to implementing them among their suppliers, small and medium-sized companies and business partners, it's quite a challenge, especially in countries with a systemic corruption environment. So we look at having very practice-orientated tools. And when we start working, normally we come up first with a publication that we call No Excuses, is looking at the behavioral side of corruption. Because we found out that often when SMEs want to implement compliance management systems, there's a lot of resistance from the staff. And we debate with them and show them how they can counter typical excuses for corrupt behavior. And we adapt these excuses to their cultural, socioeconomic context. So typical excuses: I did not know that this was corruption. I didn't do it for me. I did it for my company. No one gets hurt if I do it. It's actually a win-win situation. Or if we don't do it, somebody else will, and so on. Yeah, so starting from these very typical arguments, we built capacity among in the most cases, the owners of the SMEs, and show them how they can integrate their staff to identify in the first place their specific risks, and then build up their compliance management system. And what of course is crucial is the tone from the top. As we know from all companies, not only for SMEs, but especially for SMEs, because they have the direct contact with their employees. So one of the challenges that we face by applying this program is that it's not so easy to know what happens really on the company level afterwards. Do they really implement changes? What are their hurdles? What are their successes? So this is something that we try to counter by offering formats that are more not only one-day trainings, but is support in the long run. A program which is called Integrity Journey is a program that assists companies during 6 months, starting from a real business case, starting from a strategy on how what the company wants to achieve by implementing a compliance management system. For example, looking for new clients or having access to credit or other aspects that can be also related to staff, for example. And building on this basic idea, this starting point, we then provide knowledge by trainings, by supporting them one-to-one with the compliance officers network that we have. And then we can see how the company is changing, what they are implementing, and can drop a lot of learnings from these processes. Another tool that we use to make sure that we can follow what is happening on the company level is what we call the Integrity app, which is a self-assessment tool which allows companies to see to what extent they are already compliant with international compliance standards. There are different questions, and then they answer these questions, and they can identify their blind spots and hopefully work on these blind spots. And what we do in some countries is send this anonymized data to the governments. That allows governments to define policy based on the real gaps that have been defined on the company level. For example, in Colombia, we send every 2 weeks the reports from the results of the Integrity app to the Secretariat of Transparency. They work in integrity pacts and encourage the companies that join these integrity pacts to use the app. So they get constantly information on the situation in the companies. By the way, we use this tool also for public sector in Brazil. For example, the government of Brazil reached out to us to also make this tool applicable for their public compliance officers. And it's the same way. So people in the federal institutions, the employees, can use the self-assessment, and that allows the Ministry of Transparency, CGU now, to see on to what extent the public institutions are already compliant. So there are a lot of tools around. Another example, perhaps, from Indonesia, we set up a program which is called SheBit, together with UNDP to support the policy of the Indonesian government, which is promoting the participation of SMEs in public procurement. And we set up a specific program for women-led companies to get capacity on in participating in public tenders, but at the same time make sure that they do it with integrity. And at the end of this capacity building program, the ladies can share their experiences and success stories. And like SAIPI, we believe that success stories are really important to promote business integrity among companies, SMEs especially, and create this whole network and opportunity to come together in collective action, to have a platform where they can share their experiences, their challenges, where they see that they are not alone, which is really an important factor. It's not a fact that everybody is acting with corruption. There are others around that want to do the same, and if they go together and bring their efforts together, they really can make a difference, and we share these kind of examples. So collective action is definitely key to promote a level playing field on integrity. And with this, I think I stop here. I will share some links from the tools that I just mentioned here, so that you can have a look at our website if you're interested, and happy to come back to your questions, or anytime you would like to reach out to me, please feel free to do so. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Suzanne, for sharing your successful experience of work with SMEs in different countries. We are running out of time, but still we have an opportunity to have a look at the experience of one country, which is Ukraine. And I'll ask Antonina Prudko, who is head of Secretariat of Ukrainian Network of Integrity and Compliance, UNIC, to share with us how UNIC is staying loyal to its members and continues supporting small enterprises in their everyday compliance work. So, Antonina.
Hey, everyone. I think that it's okay with connection, because we had like running out of electricity recently, just before my input. But I hope everything would be okay, and I'm really pleasure to participate today in this discussion and present some Ukrainian experience and our initiatives on integrity in small and medium-sized enterprises. UNIC is already like mentioned today, and we as initiative which start in 2017, we are working as a collective action initiative in Ukraine. We unite business around the values of transparency, integrity, and zero tolerance of corruption. And actually our mission is act as an expert center and a platform for integrity standards and corporate compliance implementation. We are working on strengthening from one side. We are working on strengthening and development of our members through the compliance system developments and their networking and case-based learning and best practice sharing. But from other side, during these years, we have united around the network and unique community of experts in compliance and business integrity in Ukraine. And they are not only representatives of those 50 unique members and a couple dozen of our partners, but also hundreds of other specialists. We involve specialists and practitioners to join our permanent networks experts bodies, which is like working in different areas like taxes, pharmaceutical, banking, and other working groups on specific incentives, which we are working together with government, and Alana already mentioned some of them today. We also like annually conducting around 30 online, offline business integrity related events, and which covering over 10,000 key audience. So actually one of our main direction is promoting business culture for a wider amount of businesses, and not just businesses in Ukraine. It's also our key factors in work. And I'm really proud to say that despite pandemic years and the full-scale war in our country right now, UNIC is still relevant. We've managed to meet requests from Ukrainian businesses, including small and medium enterprises. And as Olga already mentioned, that no one our members leave UNIC during this year. We even have two more new members, and one of state-owned enterprises, the biggest state-owned enterprises, now a full UNIC member as a first SOEs which we have in Ukraine among our members. Talking about SMEs and more specifically about our work with them. For us, SMEs became a target several years ago because we understand that as Ukrainian SMEs really needs some more practices and some specific instruments that explain them in a more easier way what is compliance and why they need it. Because if we are talking about bigger company, there is more or less understanding among them, but as for SMEs, we really understand that we need to find something special. And we especially understand that SMEs are the most suffering category during the war. According to the recent EBA research, just 5% out of all Ukrainian enterprises does not report any financial losses, just 5%. And over 20% reported losses over 100K US dollars, and just 28% percentage of companies resume their work in a full scale, which means that they are surviving now in real meaning of these words. For Ukrainian SMEs, involvement now in the recovery plan, implementation and reconstruction projects, which we hopefully will have, and the access to European markets now is extremely important things, and which mean that integrity standards and compliance practices implementation will be one of a high priority for them. And we expected from SMEs, Ukrainian SMEs, more high motivation now to talk about compliance and to understand how they can start this process and what and how and in what way they can implement in their daily procedures. Therefore, we decided to open and suggest almost all our existing instruments for highly motivated SMEs, not just for members or bigger companies, and just would like to share with you several of the instruments which we have and or we already suggest to SMEs and have some experience or just launched, and this is a kind of pilot which we are going to see in the nearest future how it will work for them. So one of the program which we just recently launched, it's a pilot grant program for SMEs. We launched in September. And this program primarily purpose is to provide compliance support to Ukrainian SMEs in preparing to the European markets, obtaining investments or financial grants from international institutions, and searching for new counterparts in Europe. With this program, we aim to extend the range of Ukrainian companies that work with integrity principles and build a compliance control system, proper compliance system. So it's actually foreseen the usual way which we have for our unique members when they can do a self-assessment, they can do compliance check, outside compliance check from the practitioners who know how to do it, with individual recommendations and individual working plan, which we helping to SMEs to develop and then implement. But this would be in a more smaller scale, adapted to the SMEs needs, since they do not need the full scale of all these policies and procedures if we are talking about bigger companies. We also have launched last year our unique business academy, which also foreseen some adapted models for small and medium enterprises, and they can participate in these education models. During this year, we already presented a series of webinars on topics which now are more highly requested from SMEs as well, and they're related to war, of course, but it's relating to sanction compliance, HR compliance, procurement, taxes, and which changes now we have in legislation in related to war. So our practitioners, compliance officers who already have experience, or our consultancy legal companies, they explain in different ways what to do and how to implement these changes, and why compliance approaches is important now to pay attention. We also have a number of adapted policy templates like code of conduct, procurement, third-party check, and etc., which we adapted for small and medium enterprises and can suggest them to use. And now one of the new initiatives, we already had experience before we issued series of videos for SMEs where we explain in more simple way everything about compliance, but now we have a plan to do a new series of videos with DIA Business and Office of Experts, which are like really popular now among SMEs, and on their platform we are ready to do the series where our experts from Unique can explain on a real cases with what they can start and how they can proceed to have this compliance system in place. And we also like see that some kind of articles, case-based materials, which in really simple language can explain basis of compliance and where SMEs can take information, how they can start, and where they can find support. This kind of materials also very helpful. We recently issued quite interesting materials. I'm going to share with you links so you can read it in English because we have it in both languages, and it actually explains basics, how they can start and where they can take materials, and where they can take support and why they need compliance even during the war. So all such kind of instruments which we are trying to use with SMEs, we see that now more and more smaller businesses interested in the topic of compliance, and they really came to our events. They eager to find more information, although it's frankly speaking, one of the challenges now for us is it's not a first priority for them. We understand that for the nearest future, they will need those instruments and systems, but they trying to survive now. And to finalize, I also want to agree with previous presenters that collective actions are really important and can be those platforms which might help to SMEs understand and implement business integrity practice in their work. From our experience, we see that our members, which are mostly bigger companies, they also eager and ready to share their experience, and we are using their experience and their cases and their willingness to share practices with smaller companies, because for Ukrainian, for example, bigger companies, it is important to have reliable suppliers, and they want to have equal rules for everyone, for every businesses. So as I mentioned, that we have a quite strong pool of experts, including practitioners who are willing to share their experience with small and medium enterprises. With this, I think I will end my example sharing and ready to answer any questions if you have. And thank you for having us, our experience here.
Thank you, Antonina. I think that we are really running out of time, so I can wrap up this session and share my conclusions maybe in writing in the chat box, and I'll pass the floor to Oля Savran for delivering the closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. And I'm here at the very closing session together with John Q from EBRD. We will simply share with you the general ideas of our future activities, and will inform you about things which might be of interest for you. But before that, I see that there is actually a question to Antonina in the chat. Maybe you can, I will send it to you and you can answer that separately. So where do we stand now with this business integrity group for the region of Eastern Europe, Central Asia? As Patrick said in the beginning, it's our third meeting, annual meeting. Well, actually, if you start thinking from 2016, when we had our first meeting in Kiev, probably we're even older, but that doesn't matter so much. What matters is that we are advancing, we are delivering knowledge products, and I'm very happy that we have now finalized this business integrity regional study, second regional study. It is now live on our website, and I very much hope that you will make a good use of it in practice. I'm sure that it will be very important for the governments, because I think what we're trying to do here more is to equip governments with knowledge and tools for promoting business integrity in order to match the leading role that we are seeing on behalf of the business in our region. So please very much use that in your work. For the business integrity partners from the private sector, I would like to call upon you to be in touch with us, to tell us about your experiences and stories, because as colleagues already said, we will be doing another study like that in several years' time. And we would be very happy to showcase your achievements, to showcase your good practices, and to spread them in the region. So let's stay in touch and continue sharing good practices. In terms of good practices, we have one more what we call knowledge product coming soon. You remember from the last year meeting that we are engaged in developing the study of business ombudsman institutions in the region, and we are advancing on this study. We hope to have the good draft with the recommendations sometime by November. There's an initiative, as far as I know, I'm looking at Tanya Korotka for that. There's an initiative to have a meeting of business ombudsman institutions from the region, possibly in Poland, possibly in November, but I will leave that to the business ombudsman to announce that. So we'll be happy to share this new study with you there. The third point I want to make is that apart from this meeting that we're having today for our region, we, the Anti-Corruption Division and the Oecd, are organizing a whole series of business integrity events this autumn. And you are very welcome to take part in all these events. They're open to public, they address different issues, and they would definitely be useful for you. So the next meeting will be on the 30th of September, this week, on Friday, and it will be dedicated to the issue of incentives. We already started talking about that. This is one of the new elements of 2021 recommendations. We'll be discussing more what kind of incentives, how they can work, or maybe what are the challenges. So we will look into incentives, positive and negative, and we will also be looking at the challenging task for the governments and private sector partners as well of measuring or assessing compliance programs. Because if you want to incentivize something, you should know whether it's a real compliance program or not. So how to do that? So very welcome to the 30th of September event. And please also follow us on our website about business integrity series. There will be several more meetings coming, including on SMEs. There will be another dedicated meeting for SMEs, and there will be several other regional events for Latin America, Africa, MENA, and Asia Pacific eventually. But then coming back to our region, our own region, I think that the main two activities that we should inform you about is, one is the monitoring of our region, and the other is the capacity building. I will focus more on the monitoring, As many of you know, in the Anti-Corruption Network, we run a program called Istanbul Action Plan. It covers 10 countries of the region, from Moldova to Mongolia. We have run a pilot monitoring for the 5th round monitoring last year, and we are now very close to launching this 5th round monitoring in the whole region in November this year, and the high-level meeting that we're planning in Paris on the 16th of November. We have finalized the methodology for this monitoring, and it now has 9 blocks that we will assess, including anti-corruption policy, prevention of corruption, criminalization of corruption and enforcement, and one of 9 areas is called business integrity. So that's one specific area that we will regularly measure in our 10 countries. With this block, I was thinking of showing it to you on the screen, but probably it would be best if I share it in the chat with a link. It would be more useful for everybody. This block consists of 4 main areas. We are looking into the corporate governance rules that should require the responsibility of boards of listed companies to ensure integrity. We are looking at state-owned enterprises, and there, according to the OECD standards, the governments have to create structures in state-owned enterprises that will be responsible for preventing of corruption, and we will look into specific companies, specific SOEs in each country to see how they are performing in the anti-corruption area. The third block of questions is related to the disclosure of beneficial ownership. That's one of the areas that was already mentioned in the study as a precondition for business integrity. And the fourth area that we will be examining is the non-judicial mechanisms for resolving issues between business and government. In other words, business ombudsman institution, which are a big trend in our region. So these 4 areas we will be measuring regularly, and we are sure that this monitoring will not only help countries to improve in their performance, but also will give us a very good data and information about reforms in the region and understanding of what works and what doesn't work. Because in fact, that's one of our big tasks in the OECD now, is to develop good knowledge tools, to develop good evidential basis that will allow promoting business integrity. And 2 main directions that we are exploring now is how to continue measuring business integrity performance of countries, as we do in our region, how to improve the set of data that we're collecting to see who's doing better and who's doing worse and why. And the other approach for measuring, as we call it, is indeed how to assess compliance programs. We talked a lot about this, what Ludas called substance over form. So indeed, how to identify good substance and how to incentivize this good substance. So these are our main analytical directions for future activities. Now, again, in our region, what we are planning to do together with EBRD is a capacity building program that will help promote these good ideas and practices in the region. But I think I will now pass the floor to Chilen, not to usurp the closing remarks. And we'll invite you to talk about both our joint program and how this will address the business integrity challenges in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. And I will endeavor to keep my remarks short
given that I know we all have other pressing matters to attend to. I think that the business integrity is really not just on the shoulders of business, but it's an ecosystem that requires the cooperation of many different parties. I think when people about business integrity in the past, they would think, well, how can we do this? But I think we're seeing now that it involves a deal of cooperation, a great deal of work in many different sectors, including the external community. From the EBRD standpoint, we've seen trends that change this area. A real focus on SOE reform by the governments and really drastic SOE reforms in various of our countries of operations. We've seen the increase of and distribution of business ombudsman as well. And we're seeing an increasing demand for knowledge and capacity from the private sector, how it's compliance profile so that they have access to international markets. Of course, the EBRD is happy to be able to support these initiatives, including through the support of anti-corruption act plans with several of our clients, which think vision of loans and other financial initiatives clients in hand. And we're very proud to be a partner in regard first in helping to advise on the business integrity indicators that will form the basis of monitoring that Olga is still participating in the monitoring missions to help the standards we are advising upon are implemented throughout the country. And most important, so happy and proud to announce that we'll be working together with the OECD in developing capacity building workshops, seminars, and types of events that seek to build on the work that we have done of business integrity workshops. That the second phase will be more specific and more targeted to issues that people are interested in hearing about. And most importantly, we're hoping that these workshops demand-driven, in that they will come from our regions and from them seeking assistance on specific issues they would like to improve. And so very happy to be a part in business integrity with the OECD. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you, Chair Wen. And I think with this, we have completed our agenda for today. I would like to thank everybody for your active participation, including for questions. I would like to thank the interpreters for helping us to understand each other. And I finally would like to thank all the speakers and my own excellent team, led by Tanya Khovanska, the head of our business integrity program, and Sasha Onitko, who worked together to organize this meeting. Thank you, everybody. Have a very good evening. And if you want to either listen once again to this event or share it with your colleagues, it will be posted on our website. All the very best. Have a good evening.